Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Zoom into Nature, Ohio's Bats. This evening, Todd Cartner will deliver his presentation, The Unseen Wonders of Ohio's Bats, Benefits, Research, and Future. I'm Renee Barranca, the Director of Conservation Education and Outreach at Western Reserve Land Conservancy. At the Land Conservancy, I develop virtual and in-person programming for people of all ages. I'm fortunate to be able to host our field trips within the network of conservation properties the Land Conservancy has protected in Northeast Ohio, which totals over 75,000 acres of natural landscapes, family farms, and urban green spaces. Tonight, we'll take a deep dive into the world of Ohio's bats. In August, I joined my colleagues from the Nature Conservancy and The Ohio State University to co-host Ohio's second Bat Blitz. The first Bat Blitz was held in the Dayton area about 2 years ago. Our event brought over 70 bat biologists from Ohio and surrounding states to Ashtabula County, which is nestled in the extreme northeastern corner of our state. They conducted survey work at 8 locations over the course of 2 nights. In addition, we offered a public event to help us all learn more about bats and dispel their many myths. This sort of research and outreach is vital for Ohio's bat species, half of which have already experienced declines of over 95% in the last decade. Biologists are working hard to support the remaining individuals of these species in the hopes of positioning them for the best chance of surviving and reproducing. In outreach efforts, such as Todd's this evening, are connecting the public with these fascinating mammals. I look forward to learning more about bats tonight with you all. As always, please remember to place your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Do not use the chat feature, and we will spend some time at the end of the program to cover your questions. It's my pleasure to introduce Todd Cartner. A lifelong resident of Northeast Ohio, Todd has always been pulled towards the natural world. With degrees in mechanical engineering and computer science, he has worked for over 40 years as an engineer, scientist, and clinical research director. Seeing bats fly out of a barn at dusk led to his fascination for them. About a decade ago, he became hooked on bats after discovering accessible technology that permitted listening to bats in flight. In 2023, Todd and his wife Ann began pursuing bat education and research. Both Todd and Ann are Ohio certified volunteer naturalists who volunteer for many organizations, including the Nature Conservancy, Portage Park District, Ohio State Parks, the Ohio Division of Wildlife, and more. Todd is a member of the Ohio, Northeast, and Midwest Bat Working Groups. Together, he and Ann have conducted over 50 bat educational events across Ohio for more than 2,000 children and adults. In 2024, they founded Discover Bats Ohio and continue to do events and conduct acoustical research. Welcome, Todd.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
What? Great. Well, thank you, Renee. Thank you for
Yes.
hosting. And hello, everybody from Suffield, Ohio. We have a beautiful evening, and I'm going to switch screens here. Give me just a second. Turn that off. And okay,
Good.
so we're going to zoom into this here. Okay, some things I'm going to just level set some expectations here tonight. And I appreciate everybody joining us this evening. I continue to be utterly fascinated about bats. I learn something amazing and new about every day about bats. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about why we're here tonight. Okay, I'm not here to tell you my opinions about bats. Not here to influence you to like bats. I'm not here. I am here to give you scientific information about bats, and I'll tell you a bit more on that in a moment. I saw this meme on the internet that was particularly meaningful to me. It says, "Science is not the truth. Science is finding the truth." When science changes its opinion, it hadn't lied, it just learned more. And I think that is particularly relevant to bats. We have a lot of aspects of bats, like Renee said, that we've lost a significant portion of the bats in Ohio and the United States. And climate change is affecting bats. We potentially have a new species of bats, bat that is in Ohio that I'll discuss later, that is coming up from the south, largely due to climate change. And so I'll tell you more about that. But to give you a little bit about this, okay, and this is welcome and happy Bat Week, everybody. Bat Week is an annual event put on by the Bat Conservation International. And to that, I want to talk about kind of why we're here. And survey says, kind of like the TV game, after looking at 1,095 articles from 1956 to 2019, this presentation or this publication here said that bats are largely portrayed as disease carrying in 17% of the articles sampled and threats in 80% of the article sampled. And bad bats, okay, this when you start to market information, bad bats had a generally higher reading engagement than positive information. And articles that actually covered the benefits of bats were only about 3%. And I think this could just getting the media on board to how precious and how valuable bats are would be a lot to help them just in the communications about them. So this is an article that was from the EcoHealth Journal in 2023. Going through this presentation, I will have a lot of these articles that I've used to validate this. At the end of the presentation, I will show you a QR code that you can scan. It goes to a Google Drive folder, and I have somewhere between 45 and 50 journal publications in that folder that will be able to provide you references if you're interested in following up with that. So yeah, look forward to that at the end of the presentation. The one thing that I do want to mention here is a cultural statement, because this is very near and dear to me personally. I have nieces that are a Potawatomi Indian, and I also had a next door neighbor who is Seneca Indian. So understanding their beliefs and their relationship to the land is really important to me. So that with that, I'd like to make this cultural statement here. I acknowledge the many indigenous people who have been dispossessed from this region of Ohio. Some of these tribes include the Erie, Seneca, Delaware tribe transitioning to the Iroquois during the Beaver Wars. For millennia, they lived, hunted, fished, and cared for the land and waterways in Ohio. Indeed, the state's name derives from a Seneca term meaning beautiful river. Today, Native Americans of diverse ancestries and tribal affiliations continue to reside in Ohio, like the people I mentioned, sustaining their heritage, beliefs, and practices, and contributing to the life of region's life and vitality. With this statement, I'm affirming my commitment to creating a respectful, collaborative relationships wherever possible in the work that I do and the information that I present. I respect the enduring relationship Indigenous people have with their land and their territorial, traditional territories. So I thank you for listening to me for that. Okay. Yes, we have bats in Ohio. This is literally standing in the middle of our front yard. When I was putting my granddaughter in her car seat, she was getting ready to leave. And this is what we stood at the side of the car and watched for about 10 to 15 minutes. These are big brown bats that we see almost every night in our backyard here. So it's just, I never get tired of watching bats. Their dexterity and their flying is just totally amazing. So right, direct from our front yard. So we're going to start with a little quiz. Okay, so everybody here, get your pad and paper ready here, take your votes here, but we're going to start off with the idea here that the taxonomical order Chiroptera means hand wing. Is that a true or false statement? Think of your answers. And with that, that answer is true. Give you an example here. It's unfortunate because I've actually made bat hands for people who see our live presentations. I actually have gloves with fingers that are proportional, but you can see the upper arm, lower arm, thumb. We both have thumbs that are about the same proportional size, but their fingers, four of their fingers have grown significantly throughout evolution, and that has largely given them the ability to fly. As you can see in the human bones down there, that waving your arm or waving your hands would not get you very far, but that the word Chiroptera does mean hand wing. So the next question, bats make up only a small portion of mammals worldwide, okay? We could talk about that either from the species perspective or just in general mammals, but is this true or false? Got your answers? Okay, that is false. Actually, we'll get into this in a moment, but a large portion of bats, from a taxonomical standpoint, they make up about 20% of all mammals worldwide. They're second only to rodents, and combined, they make up about 60% of all the mammals species worldwide, and they make up physically a lot of animals as well, which I'll show you in some videos here in a few moments. Next question, the wingspan of a bat can be almost as large as a bald eagle. True or false? You know, you just saw a little brown, or excuse me, a big brown bat flying in our yard. You know, there's bats flying around, but can it be as big as a bald eagle? Well, yes, it can. The flying fox bat has a wingspan of about 5.5 feet. That's only about 6 inches shorter than the 6 foot of the American bald eagle. And that is the largest bat. The smallest bat in the world is the hummingbird bat, or excuse me, the bumblebee bat. And it is about the size of the end of your pinky. So they quite a range in the different species and their sizes. So bats can walk, but only at night, so we don't see them. Is that true or false? That would be a false, because bats actually, their legs will not support them. That's why they hang upside down. They're unique in that they don't physically have to apply pressure to grasp things that they hang on. Think of their feet largely like a clothespin. You squeeze the clothespin to open it up and clip it onto something. And then when you let go, it just holds on. That's largely how their feet work. Okay. So they can actually be very comfortable and sleep. They don't have to worry about accidentally letting go and falling to the ground here because the way their feet function. Next, bats only drink during flight. And this will be a good question. Maybe some of our ornithologists in the group tonight will get this question, because we've probably seen some birds doing this as well. Swallows will do this sometimes on ponds, but yes, bats only drink during flight. If they can't stand up, it would be very difficult for them to get to a water source and actually drink from it. So it is important. We'll get into this at the end of the presentation. When I discuss tips about what we can do for bats, we'll talk about water sources at the end of the presentation. Here's things, Mom. Think about this, okay? Because I remember what my children weighed when they were at birth. But if you think about this, a mother bat gives birth to pups, just like dogs, that can weigh up to as much as 40% of her body weight. Is that true or false? And that answer is true. Yes. And not only that, or do they weigh 40% of their body weight, but they actually give birth while hanging upside down in the maternity colonies there. So it's just some pretty amazing stuff that they do. The other thing I'll mention here as well is that despite a lot of public opinion, bats are very, very clean animals. Their skin is very fragile, and it's up to them to take very good care. So it's a lot of the time during the initial weeks with mothers and their pups, you can see a lot of time grooming to take care of their skin. Okay. Here, we've all heard of this since we were kids. Bats are blind. We've heard the statement, blind as a bat. True or false? That would be false. Okay. Actually, the rods and cones and receptors in their eyes make them more adept at seeing in low light conditions. then actually they actually have better sight than we do. It's just a situation that for their feeding, they don't have a lot of use for that, flying around looking for insects. We'll get into echolocation in a little bit, but yes, they can see very good in the dark. And then the last thing we'll talk about here really quickly, and you write down some numbers here, maybe drop some numbers in the chat. But what do you think the average number of insects eaten in an hour by an insect-eating bat or a Vesper bat? This actually, they can go as high as 400 to 600 insects per hour, eating between 2,000 and 3,000 insects a night. And we'll discuss the weight of that consumption here in a little bit. So other things that I think are very amazing about bats, lifespan. Okay, big brown bats can live up to 20 years. Little brown bats can live to be 36 to 40 years, and that has some pretty significant biological implications that I'll talk about in a moment. Heart rates. Okay, this is something that's for having a watch that tells me my heart rate. This is incomprehensible that they're during hibernation, they have a heart rate that ranges from 10 to 20 beats per minute. When they're out of hibernation and just resting during the day, their heart rate ranges from 200 to 300 beats per minute. And during flight, it can be over 1,000 beats per minute, which is just astounding for me. And think about all the blood that's pumping during that time and all the stuff that's going on. Sight depth perception. So we talked about echolocation, and this is how they actually do this. When they're flying around, their echolocation calls are giving them uh, in the X and Y axis. They don't know when to go up, they know when to go down, they know when to go left, and they know when to go right. But the other thing that I find is amazing is when they start to hone in on an insect, that depth perception through echolocation can be less than 3 feet. And I've recently read some publications that say that that could actually be as little as 6 to 12 inches. That's how adept they are at their echolocation and zeroing in on a bat, or excuse me, a moth. And I'll have a short video to show in a second to show you how amazing that is. Hearing. Okay, this is another thing because as a kid who used to grow up listening to loud rock and roll. I know what loud music is. Most concerts are too loud for me anymore. But this echolocation calls that bats deal with every day in the process of eating can be between 120 to 140 decimals. Again, these are in frequencies that are beyond our level of hearing, but if you can actually hear the sound levels at those frequencies, that's how loud it is. So they're just dealing with very loud sounds all the time. The other thing I think is also amazing is that evolution, okay, bats have largely not evolved for the past 25 to 40 million years. If you see fossil remains or fossil skeletons of bats and look at the bone structure and the size of them, they have largely not evolved. So they were able, unlike humans, they figured out what worked for them fairly quick and started moving in that direction. So, and when they had a good thing going for them, they stuck with it. And this topic here, I'll just call biology. This could be a topic all in and of itself. We could spend an entire evening talking about this. Recently, it just came out within the last 2 months, some great work that they're doing to studying fruit bats to understand implications on human diabetes and glucose levels and how bats deal with it. Can we learn something from them to help maybe come up with a cure for diabetes? Aging. I mentioned that bats can live to be very long, very old, particularly in relationship to their size. Here in the Cooper Lab in Northeast Ohio, they're actually doing some studies on how bats evolved to that age and considering all the things that they're dealing with, hearing loss, blood pressure, hanging upside down, all of that stuff. They are very good at what they're doing. We actually don't quite understand why little brown bats die. Because they actually become more fit as they get older, and they just kind of at one point snuff out their candle. But so there's hearing, and then there's disease resistance. There's some things that bats do when infected with a particular type of fungus or virus that it doesn't affect them the same way it does humans. And we're currently looking into DNA and RNA to understand what it is about these inflammatory markers that we react to certain types of organisms that bats don't. And can we understand this and come up with a treatment for some disease? So with that, I want to talk about some of the benefits of bats. Okay, I like bananas, mangoes, figs, fig Newtons. People, when was the last time you had a fig Newton? Avocados, dates, cashews, agave, if you like tequila. In total, there are over 300 foods that bats are involved in some part of the pollination of these flowers that grow these different types of foods. So immediately we would have a huge implication in food production if we lost bats. And I'll talk about that more on my next slide. Pest control. Bats eat a lot. This is from a journal publication for economic importance of bats in agriculture. Every single one of those colors, that first color there, the yellow that says 0 to 10, 20, that is $1,200,000 there, all the way up to the last number there, which is $50 to $73 million. This is the benefit that they believe bats provide on a per county basis across the United States. So they believe that there's annually around $22.9 billion that bats, by eating pests and the reduction of insecticides, this is the benefits that they can do to agriculture. And then seed dispersal. They eat a lot of the fruit-eating bats. When they eat the fruit and they chew it up and then go fly away, they poop it out, and they are critical in certain areas on seed dispersion and helping reforestation, and particularly in areas around cocoa trees and give us chocolate. They are very important on creating healthy ecosystems that help our cacao trees thrive. And then if it wasn't for pesticide-free agriculture, we would have no real way of doing organic food production. So even that is really important. This here is an article that just came out on September 6th this year. This was really groundbreaking. This is from the Journal of Science. It's a highly reputable international journal. And this is the economic impacts of ecosystem disruption. Like I mentioned in the previous slide, if we lost our bats, what are the implications of that? First thing is, we find that we increase insecticide use by 31% in the research done in this study. And even with the 31% increase in insecticide use, we still have about a 29% reduction in crop revenue in areas where white nose syndrome has affected the bats the most. Okay. Going back to that slide and that map on the previous slide. But here's the thing that really rocked me. Okay. Because of increased insecticide use, we find that we have a 7.9% increase in infant mortality here. So this means that roughly 1 in every 13 children might succumb to some level of toxicity due to localized insecticide use. So if you can scan that QR code, if you don't want to wait, that is one of the journal publications that's in my folder at the end, and happy to let you look at that. The other thing that we really don't understand yet either is when we talk about bats and we talk about insects, is just what are all the unknown risks to humans because of this reduction in biodiversity in our local habitats and ecosystem. So here's a slide that I think I enjoy watching this. So I also thank Renee for hosting the presentation last month about the flying squirrels. It was very interesting. I will have to say, though, that we call them flying squirrels, but they are, as you saw in some of his videos, flying squirrels are actually gliding squirrels. Okay, bats are the only true flying mammal, and you'll see some of their acrobatics here. So turn up your volume and listen to this. There's a moth. There's a bat. Okay, and they scoop it right up with their tail. Okay, just like flying squirrels have patagiums, this webbing between the bat's legs is called a europagium, and it is critical for their ability to scoop up and get bats or get moths and insects in flight. I think he gets this one, but at the last minute, does he lose it? Maybe not. Okay. I think there's one here. It's pretty obviously that he gets it, and then the moth gets away at the last moment. But you can see all this acrobatics of what's going on here. If you wonder what these sounds are, all of this has been slowed down by a factor of 10. It's called time expansion. It reduces the frequency and it reduces the time so that we can actually hear this, because if it wasn't for time expansion, we would basically not be hearing anything, and their actual flight would be occurring so fast that we couldn't see it. So this video here, going back to how much bats eat. This is Bracken Cave Preserve in Texas. Okay, this is home to the largest colony of mammals in North America and one of the largest colonies of mammals in the world. There are between 15 and 40, depending on who you talk to, million Mexican free-tailed bats that live in that cave. When they start this emergence in the evening, okay, they actually come up and you can see this flight, this immersion from this cave. It will go on for over 3 hours. You can sit at the side of this cave. If you get lucky enough to get access to this area, you can actually feel the draft of these bats that just spiral out of that cave for hours. The amazing thing to me is that when you think about 15 million bats, okay, what do they eat at 2,000 to 3,000 insects per night? They will go for miles, up to 60 miles in any direction, consuming 140 tons of insects per night, but not just going into nearby states trying to find a good meal. They can actually will fly up to 5 to 10,000 feet in elevation. There's a lot of non-native pests that like to feed on our agricultural plants out in the Great Plains. It is imperative that these insects are out there to help reduce those non-native, really pest insects. So coming here, this is a kind of a little bit of the conservation status of bats in North America. You can see that Mexico has a significant number of bats, more than we do, about 142 species. We have about 44 here, and Canada has 17. A lot of that has to do with the climate. It's much colder farther you go north. But the other thing I'd like to point out here too is the color coding here is that the proportional to number of bats that have some critical or imperiled or vulnerable conservation status on them in the United States and Canada in comparison to Mexico. About 52% of bats need some sort of conservation status applied to them. And this actually comes from a number of sources. Okay, locally in the state of Ohio, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Division of Wildlife, is responsible for keeping up the conservation status. And the last report on mammals for the state of Ohio was 2022. They list that there are over half of the bats in the state of Ohio are either endangered or a threat status on them of some form or another. There's only one bat in the state of Ohio that is relatively secure. From the United States perspective, that comes across from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then the IUCN is an organization out of Switzerland that manages the conservation status for pretty much everything on a worldwide basis. Okay. So as I mentioned before, bats make up about 20% of all species, rodents 40, and you combine that, two groups of animals make up 60% of all the bats or all the mammals worldwide. The other thing I think is amazing, and we learned this from a conference literally less than 2 weeks ago. We attended the conference a year ago, and they told us that there was 1,469 species of bats in the world. And we just found out 2 weeks ago that there are actually now up to 1,482 worldwide. I looked into that a little bit more today. We've actually discovered 3 of those species of bats were discovered in North America. So there's a lot of opportunities. We think we know everything that's out there. In reality, we don't. So it's a great opportunity if you want to learn or do discovery, that there's a lot of stuff in our natural world that we can still do. From a taxonomic perspective, Vesper Tilionidae, okay, you don't have to learn how to pronounce that whole word, but just call it Vesper, okay? Vesper bats make up the largest portion of bats in the United States. Vesper bats are all insect-eating bats. In fact, all 10 of the species in the state of Ohio are all Vesper bats, insect-eating bats. Vesper means simple nose. The word does, just like hand, wing, and chiroptera. Okay. And bats in the United States, or most of the bats in the United States, and all of the Vesper bats are entirely insect eating. Going back to that media coverage of bats from the initial slide, I think it's very interesting every year that we have conversations around Halloween and vampire bats. But in reality, of the 1,482 species of bats in the world, only 3 of them are vampire bats. Okay. They are relatively small bat. They do feed entirely off of blood, and they feed mostly off of livestock. And like we get bit by a mosquito, that's largely the physical interaction between a vampire bat and a cow. They really don't know that they're being fed on, and it's really very insignificant. It's not like the media or Hollywood wants to make out vampire bats. Okay. In fact, there's a Dr. Jerry Carter of Ohio State University has done some amazing work to understand the social behaviors of vampire bats, because in reality, blood is not very nutritious. And in order for vampire bats to eat, they need to consume a significant amount about every 3 days, or they will starve to death. So as bats get sick, or bats become a little under the weather, they have a very evolved social structure that they actually will help each other out. So it's just a very interesting aspect of a part of our bat community that gets a really bad name. The other thing I mentioned here before during the video, Vesper bats have that membrane called a uropasium, or insect scoop. They don't actually try and interact with insects by biting them out of the air. They actually use that little net or webbing between their legs and tail to scoop it up. And then, as you saw, literally bend over, sometimes with somersaults, to eat the insect out of that webbing or that uropasium. Okay. Now we're going to get into a little bit about Ohio's bats. Okay, I put some references down there. So I've got the bats here. We have weight, body size, wingspan, habitat, and diet. One of the things I want you to pay attention here too is actually in reality how small many of these bats here are. So we have here the Indiana bat, which weighs pretty much about the same as a nickel and a penny. So that's the entire bat. If you were to hold a bat in your hand, one of those Indiana bats, that's what it would weigh. So very light. Okay, the other thing I want you to notice here as we look through the habitat here is the number of bats that require forest or trees in some portion of their daily summer living. So we have the little brown bat, the Indiana bat, and the tricolored bat. Tricolored bat is a state endangered bat that's about probably will end up becoming federally listed here soon because its numbers are in significant decline as well. Eastern small-footed bat is the smallest bat that we have in the state of Ohio. As you can see here, it actually weighs less than a nickel. A nickel is about 5 grams. The eastern small-footed bat weighs 4 grams, and their wingspan is really, really small. About 6 inches. We also have the northern long-eared bat, and which is a federally endangered bat. We used to have a significant colony of those in northeastern Ohio that has completely collapsed, unfortunately. But we are still seeing them around in small numbers, and I'll get into that in a moment. The gray bat, Myotis crescens, is the bat is the new bat. This is a bat that is typical in South Carolina, North Carolina, and parts of West Virginia, Virginia. That it is mostly a southern bat, but due to climate change, we're actually seeing it move north. We have been capturing them in mist nets in Shawnee State Forest in southern Ohio, and Ann and I were lucky enough this summer to actually record one in southwest Ohio. Couple more bats, evening bats, silver-haired bats, and eastern red bat, my favorite, in part because it lives in leaves, particularly beech leaves. It will curl up in beech leaves and be almost completely disguised. It's very hard to see them. The other unique thing about eastern red bats is typically all of Ohio's bats will give birth to 1 to 2 pups a year, with the exception of the eastern red bat, which will give birth to 4 to 6 pups a year. And if you think of all the stuff that a mom has to do, that their survival and their life is just totally, completely amazing to me. Last one that we talk about here, the big brown bat. This is hands down the most prevalent bat in the state of Ohio. We still have them flying around our house every night. I'll show you in a moment how I know that. And then the hoary bat, which is the largest bat that we have in the state of Ohio, which is typically done well, except for the fact that it is a migratory bat, and we're having a lot of problems with collisions with wind turbines on that, with that bat in particular. But we've been able to do some research. The biologists have worked with the wind energy companies, the wind turbine companies, and bats typically do not fly above 10 mile an hour, okay, 10 mile an hour winds, okay? So when it's windier than that, they just go back to their hibernate for until the wind dies down. We've been able to convince the wind turbine companies to change their startup practices or algorithms on their windmills to start up when the wind is over 10, maybe 15 mile an hour. And so by just doing something as simple as that, we've been able to significantly reduce the number of collisions with hoary bats and wind turbines. So there is some good stuff going on here. So here's a little bit of the science stuff. This is the things that I like a lot. So mist netting and heart netting. Many of you, particularly in the naturalist community, may have had the opportunity to do mist netting. It's the same mist netting that we do for birds. We just do it at night, and we move them to some different locations, which I'll show you in a moment. The good thing about mist netting is you call it bird in hand or bat in hand. The ability to do an exact species identification is near 100% with mist netting and harp netting. The problem is that only works for the time that you have the mist net up. So when on other nights and other weather conditions or bats that become too smart and like to fly around the nets, it can be hard to understand populations. And that's where acoustic monitoring comes in. It is not as exact a science as identifying a bat in hand, but the advantage here is that we can do stationary monitoring for an extended amount of time. Pit tags, they're the same kind of things that you might use with a pet if you've ever had a pet chip. Same kind of thing that we can do for bat. The pit tags for bats are about the size of a grain of rice, and you can actually put readers near hibernaculums and maternity colonies and actually pick up their signal when they go by. Modus, okay, is another type of measuring. The advantage of this here is that you can track them much farther ranges, okay? Then the next thing I want to talk about is emergence studies. This is a very low tech, very satisfying type of bat monitoring that anybody here can do. If you can hit a counter clicker and you have a comfortable lawn chair, you can do emergence counts or swarm counts. You literally have to go out to a building where bats are known to exist right before dusk, get comfortable, and then count the bats that come out. And if you do that over time, we get a really good statistical idea of what the population of the bats are. Unfortunately, again, because we don't have bats in hand, we don't really know what the species are, but we do have a really good assessment of what the population is. Cameras. Here's another thing that's really amazing is that there's some software. Rather than doing emergence counts with people, we can actually mount cameras, take videos, and then there's some really amazing free software that US Geological Survey is working on that can actually count bats from videos. And that's working really well for understanding populations in certain areas. And yes, genetic analysis. There is a company that I've worked with called Species from Feces. We'll go out to a bat box, we'll collect the guano underneath it, we'll put it in a properly sealed type of enclosure and send it off to the lab, and they can do DNA analysis of the specific species. The other thing that's really good about that is not only can they tell us bat species, but they can actually analyze what the bat was eating. So we get a lot of good information here just by analyzing the guano from bats. Okay, couple things I wanted to note is anytime you handle bats, you need a federal permit. So mist netting and harp netting requires federal or state permits. Pit tags and modus tags require a federal or state permit to place the transmitter on the bats, but after you have the uh, radios or the transmitters on the bats, then you can use typical software or antennas to pick that kind of stuff up. So that's something that's really evolving. Okay. This is largely how we spent most of our summer. Okay, so this is my wife, Ann, and I. I would go out in the morning and pick up monitors. I would pick them, I would bring them home, I would recondition them, and then would go back out in the evening and put them back out. I was going out to these monitors 2 to 3 times a week, checking on their function. They're actually very, very reliable. I've had no major issues with these acoustic monitors, but sometimes we had so many bats that the memory cards, even 64 and 128 gigabyte cards were filling up. So as part of that, we worked for Portage County, Portage Park District this summer, and what we now know of is the first ever county-wide species baseline of Portage County. We've been checking the NABAT database here, and our data is the first ever. We were able to complete 6 of 6 parks, 4 of 8 preserves, and we didn't get to any of the greenway trails. That's on hold until next summer, and we're going to continue some of our research. We had the two monitors that we put up in each of these locations were installed for 2 weeks. So over the 2 weeks, we got a really good sample. And by the end of the summer, we had over 122,000 recordings and about 9.9 terabytes of data. That was something I wasn't expecting on dealing with, but we got by that. The good news is, like I mentioned, big brown bats are definitely the most common bats. Eastern red hoary bats, we saw them almost everywhere that we went in with any of these monitors. Silver-haired bats, somewhat infrequently, and we saw no eastern small-footed bats. But endangered little brown bats and tricolored bats we found in a number of locations, and we are very confident statistically that we had good populations of both of those endangered bats, and that's going to be a follow-up activity for next year. So northern long-eared bat, except for one minor visit, we did not have anything going on with them of significance, or no Indiana bats. But we did see evening bats. That's the only bat that in the state of Ohio that does not have a significant conservation status on it, and good for that bat because they were common. So next step, we're going to apply this data to provide Portage Parks with the ability to strengthen their grant applications for having endangered species, and we're going to continue on this research. So lots of stuff there. This is my wife in our 2024 Batmobile, and me standing next to the 2023 Batmobile. Under the direction of Dr. Eileen Wiesa from the Ohio Division of Wildlife, we conducted transects. We had 2 transects that we did, and each of those transects were 2 nights. So we literally follow a very detailed protocol, drive around the county, drive these predetermined routes, and that microphone that's on top of the car will actually listen for bat sounds as we drive at exactly 20 miles an hour. The good thing here is that wasn't enough for me. So I'm working on a project for Eileen right now. The far side of the car is the current microphone. The middle microphone is a very high quality microphone that we're testing out. It's a Pedersen microphone. And then the red thing on the left there in that image is something you may have heard of called an echometer. That's a device that literally can plug into your phone or tablet and listen to bats live. We did some side-by-side comparisons, and as a result of some of this testing, we are influencing the new bat recorders that the state of Ohio is going to purchase because we found out that these newer recorders recorded significantly greater number of bat calls, which helps out a lot in the analysis. So a lot of good stuff there. How do I know all of this? I love this. I drank too much coffee and now I can see sounds. Okay. What I see is this. So you look at the top, that is the loudness. Okay. The wider that red spikes are, the louder it is. Okay. Keep in mind that the decibel levels that the bats are hearing. This here is the pitch or the frequency of the bats here, and I'll show an expanded version of that, talk about here in just a second. And on this axis, we have time, but like I mentioned before, in time expansion or the 10 times change to this, that is actually in milliseconds. We can take a little section of that. We can look at it right there. You can notice here, hopefully everybody can see my cursor. This here is 25 kilohertz. Okay, so we know that if you have perfect hearing, humans hear between 20 and 20,000 kilohertz. So even the lowest frequency sounds of these echolocations are above our ability to hear it. But these second harmonics here are going all the way up to 75 to 85 kilohertz here. So there's no way we can hear anything. But you can also notice here on this axis, 20, 30, 40 milliseconds. So you might recognize some of this here because if you've ever used Merlin, okay, which many of our birders are familiar with the Merlin app. That those sonograms that we see down there for bats are very similar to the sonograms that we see in um, Merlin. So it's using a lot of the same principles, but high frequency sounds are a different animal to deal with entirely. So there's a little bit more involved with bat sounds than there is bird sounds. Here's some mist nets that I mentioned. This is a two-high mist net that they've got stretched across this opening here. They call those flyways, and bats would be typically flying down that dirt path looking for insects, and we put the net out there. Sometimes we know that bats like to hang around water. We'll actually put some boots on and put the mist net across the river. Another great place to catch flying animals. And I'll mention flying animals because sometimes we get birds, as Renee can remember from our bat blitz back in August. We did catch a couple of birds that evening. And the other thing that we catch sometimes are flying squirrels. Okay, when they are gliding in these areas, it's not uncommon to capture flying squirrels too. But when you capture a bat, this is what happens. This lady here from Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management is actually removing a bat. You can hopefully hear those sounds. That is not echolocation. That is actually the sound of a very unhappy bat. It just got caught in the net. We have to see them hit the net, get them out of there, or they will actually chew holes in those nets very quickly. So we've talked a little bit about this acronym here, this white nose syndrome here. And what is white nose syndrome? It's pseudogymnascens destruction, or PD, is the fungus. It is lethal to bats many times here. It was first identified in the state of New York in 2006 and was first recorded here in the state of Ohio in 2010. And why is it called white nose syndrome? You can see that bat right there. Well, why wouldn't you call that? You see the white fungus around the nose there, and you think, okay, this bat has got a respiratory problem or something going on here. But actually, um, white nose syndrome is a fungus that affects their skin. It actually causes particularly hairless areas, and their wings are particularly impacted by the fungus. It itches and it dries out, and it can cause significant issues with dexterity on the bat's ability to fly as well. Impact of PD, like Renee mentioned earlier, that white nose syndrome is affected in many species between 90 and 98% of the bat population. And when, like the Ohio bats that I mentioned, their reproductive rates are 1 to 2 typical, and only one bat reproduces at higher rates. It, even with some immunity to these diseases, it's going to take a really long time for the bat populations to rebound. Mitigation. What's happening here? There's a number of scientific projects going on, antifungal treatments in caves, but you can imagine how difficult doing that is in a cave with all the textures and surfaces. Biocontrols, they are looking into some of that with mixed success here. Ironically, the thing that is showing the most benefit right now is temperature and humidity management. Bats in their hibernation or torpor and the climate in caves do overlap a little bit. And it just so happens that white nose, or that PD fungus, okay, is most impactful on bats at a relatively narrow temperature range. So by altering the temperature of the hibernaculum a small amount, we can actually help the bats get through some of these tough times during their periods of torpor. We're also looking at vaccines, but the ability to broadly inoculate populations of bats is very difficult. The prognosis is, though, optimistic. As it's growing across the United States, which I'll show you in a moment here, we are starting to see some resistance of bats in the eastern United States, and the areas that encountered the PD fungus earlier are no longer susceptible. So we're starting to see some resistance to it. Even though the virulence of the fungus in the western states is pretty much the same as it was initially in the New York hibernaculum. So it is not evolving, which is good news because we're only apparently shooting at a stationary target. But this here is a animated map that shows you how white nose came in 2006 into the state of New York, and it has progressed across the United States. Just this summer, we got notification that it was in Carlsbad Caverns. It's now all the way out into the state of Washington, Oregon, many places out in the West, and even parts of Canada. So, unfortunately, it is continuing to just go out there, but we're prepared for it. As we noticed in that original photo, was that we didn't, when we saw white nose, we saw that fungus on their face. We thought that's what the issue is because we didn't really know what was killing the bats. And what was actually happening here was that bats, I'll put myself in this category of semi-senior people that have to get up a couple times in the night to pee and get a drink of water. Bats during hibernation have to do the same thing. And if you look at this timeline here, this upper one, from November to March, this is a typical number of arousals of bats during that time period. During torpor, they'll get up, they'll fly out, and return to their hibernation here. And they have the exact amount of fat reserves to get them through that long period of time from November to March. What happens with white nose syndrome here is the skin irritation and drying causes them to wake up significantly more times here. And here's the situation on one bat that you can see here, that waking up twice as much in half the amount of time. This bat actually succumbed to starvation. It did not have the fat reserves to get through the rest of winter. The good news is another Ohio State University graduate, Sarah Stanovic, who now works for Bat Conservation International in Texas. She's the manager of the Fat Bat program. They found by putting, if you've ever been to a moth night, it's a fun event where you hang sheets up in the middle of a field, shine a light on it, and attracts the moths. What the Fat Bat program does here is they take similar lights and similar wavelengths of lights, and they locate those outside of the hibernaculum. And you may have been told that, eating a big meal before you go to bed is not good for weight loss, but it can be very good for a bat. Because if by using the light to attract extra insects at the mouth of a hibernaculum, the bats can get a last minute snack before they go into hibernation, and just a 20% increase in the body weight of a bat appears to be enough to get a bat through the winter. So we do have a lot of promise going on here with respect to white nose syndrome. But what can I do? Okay, the fact that you're already here, I mentioned that article about how media distorts the aspects of bats. You're here to get science. Okay, so with that, I asked you to do a little test here with the 10, 11 bats in the state of Ohio. Where did we see that they like a lot? They like trees, forest, and that doesn't have to be a live tree. If you remember that big brown bat that was flying around our front yard, we have specifically kept up a dead tree in our front yard. The technical term is a snag. The bark is peeling off of it. The bats will go spend their days underneath that underneath that tree bark, and they will actually, that attracts insects, and that dead tree is our busiest tree in the front yard. We love our dead tree. Next thing that we can do is have a pond. Okay, remember I said that bats drink while in flight. Something as small as a flooded tire track in a field. Something can be 6 to 8 inches wide by 5 to 6 feet long, filled with water, can be enough for a bat to get a drink. The other thing that I want to mention about water sources in your yard is probably the second biggest pet peeve I have on bat conservation is mosquito spraying. Um, when we are spraying live mosquitoes, flying mosquitoes, they have already laid their eggs in a water source. Many times we don't even know. It could be that bucket in the side yard that we forgot to empty after washing the car, or a watering can for the garden and flowers. Someplace we forgot water, and the mosquitoes are laying their larvae by the thousands in that. We have to remember that spraying for insects is not a good technique for mitigating mosquitoes. And it also has a huge impact on birds as well. So I wanted to mention both the ability to drink and mosquito mitigation as two issues there. Other thing, very popular to do. Everybody likes to put up a bat house. Um, Bat houses can be particularly complicated. They need to be on a sunny facing location. They should never be put on a tree. They in this latitude, they need to be painted dark brown or black so that they can absorb extra heat. And actually, the other bad news for people on a budget is, with respect to bat houses, bigger is better. We do have a link at the end of the presentation that talks about best practices for bat houses, as well as some bat house plans for that type of bat house, as well as another type called a rocket box. So you've got some resources at the end of the presentation that you can get to some of this information. Couple more things we're going to talk about here is native plants. Jim McCormick, a retired biologist for the Ohio Division of Wildlife, has a wonderful book called Gardening for Moths. He and Chelsea Godfred put that book together. Amazing book. I call it gardening for bat food because one of the biggest sources of particularly larger bats is moths. So having moths out flying around and the pollinating native plants that support those are very beneficial. Last thing I want, second to last thing I want to talk about is light sources here. Again, there's a lot of, we're starting to understand more about the significance of dark skies and all of that. So keep outside lights down to a minimum. And then a somewhat controversial is cats. I like cats. I particularly like our cat Ginny, but she's an inside cat that only goes outside with us when she's sitting on our lap in the lawn chairs. Feral cats in particular are, we know that their impact on birds, they also have a significant impact on bats as well. So with that, these are some of my resources. Okay. The handouts that I mentioned for um, uh, best practices for bat houses, bat building plans, information on bats can all be downloaded from that QR code right there. It just on your phone, it just pops up a Google Drive with a bunch of PDFs on it. But as promised, all of the publications, 45 to 50 of them that have gone into validating this information, are available in that journal publications folder. So with that, I think I'm pretty much done. How's
Th-
everybody doing?
Yeah, this is
Anybody?
great, Todd.
Nobody
So,
fall asleep yet?
no one's sleeping. We still have everyone watching still and lots of questions. And
Of
your wife Anne's been doing an excellent job of answering different questions for people, but
course
I'm
she
still
has.
gonna run a couple past you just because I think they're interesting and other people watching might get a lot out of them as
Okay.
well. Um, do different species of bats share the same bat houses?
I've
And
heard,
Go ahead.
I've
Go ahead.
heard that they share, we will see different bats in hibernaculums. Okay,
Okay.
particularly larger ones will get multiple species. We know that different species like to hibernate in different locations within caves and tunnels and mines. I'm not sure about bat houses. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, it was she said that there
Okay.
have been found in different species have been found in the same bat house.
Very good.
Okay. Yeah. And you mentioned this app for bats that's similar to Merlin. What is it called and how can people get that?
So the problem with that app is, and I've got it right here on my phone, is that the app is free. The app is called Echometer, and it's because the device that it works with is also called Echometer from a company called Wildlife Acoustics. The
Okay.
problem that we have with phones is that the microphones that are on phones, typically only record up to 12 to 14 uh, or excuse me, kilohertz. I couldn't think of that for a second. So they're basically the range of human hearing, and only the hoary bat is the only bat in the state of Ohio that will um, communicate at around 18 kilohertz. So there's a chance that we could hear a hoary bat. The other thing that's worth noting here too, and I'll come back to this in a second, is a lot of times we have household pets, dogs. Dogs can hear literally double the range of humans. They can hear up to 36 to 40 kilohertz. So if your dog is acting weird, it could be that a dog hears a bat echolocating somewhere outside and it's caught its interest. The other thing is domestic cats can actually hear twice the level of dogs. So there is the possibility that they can be hearing echolocation calls. I don't know how they would deal with the time aspect of that because there's a
Hmm.
lot of pulses going on quickly, but it's known that their range of hearing is pretty high. So we have an
Okay.
echometer. Echometers are a blast. I see somebody just put it in the chat that they're great to go out and do these bad education programs in the evening. We'll do a presentation like this, give some people a couple my iPad and my phone, put the microphones on the phones and literally go out and start chasing the bats around. And it's one thing to chase them out around, it's another thing to actually listen to them. This is the device right here. And it literally, through this little tab on the bottom here, plugs into your phone. The benefit of this microphone is it works for both iPhone, iOS, and Android, and it's works only with phones with USB-C attachments right now, so the newer phones. But it's a blast because it will not only let you hear the bat, but it will do its best attempt to identify the species, just like Merlin. That answer the
Okay.
question?
Yeah, yeah. There were a couple questions that I saw a handful of people ask. Like, for one thing, I'm glad to hear that they've been seeing that bats may become immune to the white nose. The question has to do with in Europe, they had heard that the bats were immune to white nose in Europe that had gone through there. Do you know anything about that information or if that might be true?
That's a good question. It's something that I'd like to look into. I
Okay.
don't know the answer to that, but I do know that after white nose showed up in the United States, they did do some work to identify sources of it in Europe. So I don't remember where. I
Okay.
know the British are really, really into their bats. As a population, there's probably more British bat biologists than anybody. They've got
Wow.
podcasts and a lot of good training information. So you're,
Interesting. Very
if
interesting.
you're
You
interested in
may
Googling that, you'll find some good stuff.
Well, you made a strong point of saying to never put a bat box on a tree. So can you explain why?
Yes, one of the reasons is the reason that bat boxes bigger is better is mostly we would put a pole up and then we would put two bat boxes back to back. back to back. Bats are notoriously poor at regulating their body heat, so they rely on going to a temperature to set their temperature. So having two back-to-back bat boxes, one facing east and one facing west, they can move to the different chambers to where they're comfortable and will actually move throughout the day as they move themselves and their pups to different locations. The other reason that we don't want to put bats on a tree is that you just don't get enough sunlight, too much shading to develop the heat. And then the third thing is predation. Snakes and other things that can crawl up a tree can crawl up the tree and get inside the um, bat box. Even on poles, a lot of times they'll put a metal guard around the pole to keep predators from going up and getting inside the bat boxes.
Okay. There was a question about the handouts and the journals. I want everyone to know that I will include these links in my follow-up email tomorrow when I send the recording of tonight's presentation out. So if you don't have a
Yep, I'm happy.
smartphone and you can't do the QR codes, I'm going to send them out to everyone anyway. So that's
Yep,
okay.
I can provide that the URLs, the direct links to that, so we don't have to use QR. So
Okay, great. And do you know the body temperature of a bat? That came up.
I should. I don't know the
It's
body
okay.
temperature of a bat in summertime
Okay.
when they're foraging. I do know that because of that work that was done with the PD fungus, that they do get quite cold in the range of 36 to 45 degrees during their torpor
Hmm.
in hibernation. But I don't know what body temperature they're thriving to for in the summertime.
Okay.
I'm hoping my wife is taking notes because I love good questions because I
Yeah. Well,
every
don't
every
worry.
time I
I'll
do a program,
we'll
we'll
get the
learn more.
question to you. Yeah, if we don't answer it tonight, everyone, we will address your questions um offline as well. But Todd, there was a question if you could possibly move the journal QR code because someone was trying to read your sources and couldn't. So can you
That is,
go back
I'll
and
provide that link of
okay,
sources
okay,
in a
perfect.
PDF in that document as well. So
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, this was fascinating. And if we didn't get to your question live, we promise we'll answer them all offline within the next day or so. But I'm going to let Anne continue. She's typing answers, so I'm going to let her answer people's questions, and we'll be logging off here in a minute. So everyone have a beautiful evening. And Todd, thank you so much for sharing this information
yeah,
with us
yeah,
tonight.
yeah. Thank you, everybody. Whether you like bats or don't like bats, my goal for tonight is that you have a better appreciation for bats.
Absolutely. Thank you, Todd.
Okay, thank you, everybody.